Hello and welcome to Chat DPS. This is your regular weekly installment of Chat with myself, Nick Lovell, and Robert Feldman. We'll have further guests on in the weeks to come, but we just to spice things up a little bit. But in between times, Robert and I have been watching the news quite closely. The first key thing, Robert, that I think is really in your bailiwick is around the fact that there's been quite a bit of heavy legislation change that's been going on in Canberra. Can you just sort of give us a brief outline of some of the things that have actually happened in the last week? Because they're quite significant, aren't they?
Yeah, look, I'll summarize it because we probably don't have the time to go into each law that passed. It was like Super Thursday or something last week in Canberra as they kind of pushed through something like 32 bills on the last sort of day of sitting in Canberra. And then perhaps we can pick up some of those bits of legislation in more detail another
time.
time. Yeah, but so amongst those 32 bills, we saw the first tranche of the Privacy Act reforms go through, and that focused on things like the tort for serious interference with privacy. It had the criminalisation of doxing, more powers for the regulator, and the ability to introduce different tiers of penalties. So there was a few changes in there. I think one of the interesting things, and try not to take up this particular segment too much, was there was some changes to automated decision making and transparency around that.
Okay.
And it's got a 2-year transition in period, which I think is quite interesting. And one of the things that have been speculated is when the next tranche comes through, does that also mean that there's going to be a 2-year transitioning period for those other more significant changes, which are sort of GDP like? So maybe some kind of indication of how much more waiting there's going to be before we get those more serious privacy
duration
reforms come through. Yeah. So I think that was quite interesting.
The duration on there.
Sorry?
Crazy. 2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Hackers love that kind of stuff. That gives them 2 years free reign.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the Privacy Act. And then we had the social media ban came through, and I think there's a 12-month transitioning period for those platforms that have been singled out, where they're going to have to ID everyone, and if you're under 16, you won't have access to that particular social media platform. So that came through.
I was concerned about that one, Robert, because how the hell do you? There was some real strangeness around how people under the age of 16 could identify themselves even. So it's, how do you, I don't know. They're saying that they don't want to people to hold on to, or these big organizations. We're talking about Facebook and, TikTok and places like that, aren't we? How do they, they're saying, it's okay because we won't hold on to the data. Is that true? It's a different jurisdiction over there, isn't it?
Well, it's they're still in terms of data retention, that they'll have their Australian entities, and it's a case of where that data is being held. Is it held in Australia? Is it being held overseas? So you need to look at that, and you need to look what technologies they're going to use. They've been talking about using some sort of facial recognition technology, which apparently the current state of that technology is not great. It can be off by several years.
It's very fresh, isn't it?
It doesn't seem to recognize things like people wearing glasses. So there's all sorts of issues there. So there's a bit of work to do in that space. And then there's that usual chestnut of how you're going to enforce it, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, there's probably a lot more to talk about there. And just before that Super Thursday of last week, we also had the standalone cybersecurity act come through as well, which included things like making ransomware payments mandatory in terms of reporting, and did a number of other things as well. So we've had a lot of change in that kind of cyber privacy space in the last couple of weeks, which like I say, we probably need to delve into in a little bit more detail another time.
Yeah, so it's not quite. I mean, I suppose I mean, just an observation from my side, really, is sort of like, we've kind of made a move, but it's not significant in terms of the fact that, we're nowhere close to GDPR. We're nowhere close to sort of like doing end-to-end digital testing and digital transformation and, end-to-end digital process, I suppose, in some respects. So we're a long, long way from the rest of the world still.
It's
Yeah.
almost like a step has been taken forward. So that's the positive thing. Steps have been taken to improve the current situation. We're a long way from where we need to be, but it's, I guess, a step in the right
Yeah.
direction, even if it's a bit disappointing that it hasn't gone as far as people were hoping.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing there is, sort of like how, if people, I mean, are we buying here in Australia just to tick boxes, or are we actually buying here to sort of protect the data of the customers and the people that are actually were holding the data on,
I,
being
I,
good
I,
guardians of the data?
Yeah, I just don't think the focus is really so much on the data. Although there is some work being done behind the scenes on things like data retention policies. So the
Yeah,
government's looking at that, but that's going to take some time to kind of harmonise everything in that space. I think really the main thrust of a lot of these different changes is all about information gathering. So
yeah,
there's a lot of reporting, and it's really about the federal government really understanding what's happening. So whether it's security of critical infrastructure, whether it's ransomware payments, whether it's other kind of cybersecurity incidents, they're trying to gather information and hopefully improve the overall posture of Australia, I guess, in terms of trying to defend the
yeah.
regular attacks that come. So that seems to be more the theme as opposed to what are we doing to actually protect the data? What are we doing about data retention? What are we doing about encryption? What are we doing about quantum encryption? Things like that. So
Quantum?
so
Yeah.
we're a long way from those sorts of questions. We're just starting at this kind of information gathering phase a lot of the time.
Yeah. The other big story, I suppose, sort of looking around the world. I mean, the first one that pulled my attention was this situation in the UK where the AI. So we're talking about AI now,
Yeah.
where some, AI had cloned somebody's voice. They'd made a call to the bank and they'd done all the other bits and pieces. Now, I'm not sure; it wasn't particularly clear to me whether this was actually something that had been done as a, sort of like a penetration type testing arrangement, or whether it was actually sort of something that had actually happened. But the follow up to that was kind of interesting because I noticed here in Australia that both Centrelink and the ATO have now reported that they're suspicious of the fact that AI is being used on their platforms. Is there any? I mean, did you gain any more insight on that than I did through the processes?
I mean, I suppose there's a couple of things. One is um, clearly the use of AI or large language models or machine learning or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So clearly the technology capability has come on in leaps and bounds over the last couple of years, such that you can just take a snippet of somebody's voice and quite easily spoof these voice ID recognition systems, or whether it's your bank or Centrelink or whatever service might be using it. It seems to be really easy to spoof it, and whether you and I think the the person who was trying that in the UK, they tried it both using like really high quality speakers to actually make sure that that AI machine learning voice
Right.
was coming out clearly, but they also did it from their kitchen table, and it worked as well. So I suppose So one thing is the ability to spoof these systems is clearly quite obvious. It seems to have been around for quite a while, so I think there's been a few similar articles around that. So it's going back at least 12 months. Um,
Right.
and I think the reaction. I think they got some comment from the banks around this, and they tend to sort of say, look. Voice ID is just one method that they use to authenticate
Yeah.
customers, and there's other methods that are used. But I think they sort of tend to claim that they've got
Yeah.
good monitoring capability there. But the question is clearly that this particular type of technology for authenticating users is compromised. And the question is, what are banks and other services doing if they still have that technology in place and they're still going to rely on that technology for authentication?
Yeah, I'm quite heavily
what are they
involved.
doing to actually combat? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite heavily involved in some of those sort of conversations at this moment in time with some of those organisations. Particularly in a couple of the banks, and obviously identity is a very, very big piece of the jigsaw at this moment in time. So being able to pre-identify yourself is actually quite a significant step forward. So voice patterning, I don't know whether it's got a future by the sound of it. If it's that easy to get where you're going. I mean, maybe getting online and doing facial recognition or whatever is going to be the way forward. I mean, the other option, I mean, one of the things that DPS is actually sort of like quite heavily involved with at this moment in time is end-to-end digital transformation, particularly around digital signing. So it's got an end-to-end digital process with it. There's talk of that being put out into products like Teams, for instance, where you can do end-to-end documentation. So maybe there's a way that the banks could actually change the way that rather than doing voice recognition, they could actually have an acceptable way of bringing people into a conversation and then doing documentation online. I don't know whether that's feasible at this moment in time, but I mean definitely identification is a big part of that.
Yeah. And to bring it back to legislation, the Privacy Act. So Australian Privacy Principle 11 requires responsible entities. So you've got to be a responsible entity under the Privacy Act. But you have to take reasonable steps to protect personal information from misuse, interference, and loss. And so what is expected from these entities is that once a technology is compromised, you should be taking some reasonable steps to ensure that you're protecting people's personal information. So are they going to be adjusting that technology? Are they going to be looking at alternative solutions to voice ID? But they have to do that under the Privacy Act.
Yeah, the identity piece is kind of interesting because you've got to do it from two different perspectives. You've got to have those that are working on the inside of the organization, those that are actually outside of the organization, the customers, if you like. So having that level of identity internally and then having a similar level of identity from outside of the organization. Two very different things, sort of giving people access to, folders and documents and all sorts of different things, it's kind of an interesting conundrum. And we're talking to a number of these organizations at this moment in time with regards to how do they actually go forward. So there's biometric cards, there's all sorts of, there's new FIDO cards and, how do we actually go about doing it? But this pre-identification piece is a big part of it. And I did read, I had to log into a portal back in the UK just recently where I had to do full facial recognition sort of passport, chip passport, all the other bits and pieces in order to be able to achieve an adequate outcome with them so they could say, oh yeah, you are the same person that's in this document or in this passport or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of again that's back in the UK. We're not quite there yet, so we'll wait and see how we go with IDAS and what have you.
Yep.
I guess, Robert, that's about us for this week, isn't it? We've spoken about AI, some of the legislative changes that have happened, sort of, as you call it, Super Tuesday or Super Thursday, whatever it was. And we'll, sort of like lots of legislation passing through the House. Quite a complex time. Any closing comments from you?
I think, as I was touching on with that reference to the Privacy Act, technology is going to continue to evolve, and the technology to defeat things like identification technology is also evolving. So organizations just have to be vigilant the whole time and look to react to that and figure out how do they best protect people's personal information.
Perfect. Okay, that was Chat DPS for this week from me, Nick Lovell, and from Robert Feldman. Thank you very much for listening. And we look forward to bringing you another exciting installment next week.
Thank you.